Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Plymouth Colony and the people that you have probably known throughout your entire life as the Pilgrims. I'm going to be referring to them more commonly as the Separatists. They're different from the Puritans that we've already talked about a little bit, and you read about them in your book if you're one of my students. The Puritans were members of the Church of England who wanted to purify the Church of England of all its Catholic influences. Separatists wanted to break away from the Church of England entirely because they saw it as being essentially beyond help. Okay, so they left England because their separatist beliefs kept them from professing loyalty to the Church of England as was required by law at that time. And they didn't come to the New World initially. They went to Holland on mainland Europe. They went to a town in the Netherlands called Leyden, and they stayed there for a time, but ultimately left Leyden for a couple of reasons. One, they were wary of how worldly it had become. This is a group that's very, very stringent in its religious beliefs. They wanted to return to this kind of old school, antique Christianity, and Leyden wasn't really doing it for them. They also feared that war would break out in Europe, and they wanted to avoid that, and they were correct. The 30 Years' War runs from 1618 to 1648. Sports Center alert. Let me silence that. And in addition, England and Spain go to war, which more directly affects Western Europe. The Anglo-Spanish War was like 1625 to 1630. It was kind of an offshoot of the 30 Years' War. So, after looking around and shopping around for ways to get to the New World, they settled on a patent from the Virginia Company to start a colony in the New World. Now, there were some drawbacks here for the Separatists. One, they were going to essentially have to work and make money for these investors from the Virginia Company, which were people that didn't really share their religious beliefs. These were Anglicans, members of the Church of England primarily. So that was the big problem. On the other hand, they were going to get pretty good financial support. They had a boat, the Mayflower, that they were going to allow the Separatists to use to sail to the New World. And once they got there, they were going to be allowed to govern themselves. So they decided that the good outweighed the bad, and they took the patent and sailed to the New World. They were bound for Virginia, like southern area down near Chesapeake, but got blown off course by bad weather during their trip, and they ended up in what we would now call Cape Cod off the coast of Massachusetts. And before they disembarked, they signed the Mayflower Compact, which if you're one of my students, you're going to look at a little bit more in class, but essentially it commits themselves to governing themselves and having consent of the governed in the Plymouth Colony. William Bradford is the governor of the Plymouth Colony. Make sure you know who that is. His exact quote upon disembarking, just to make sure I have this right, they now had no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their beaten bodies. Besides, what could they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness? Real uplifting, right? They had a long, arduous journey. Things hadn't gone well during their trip. Not to mention Bradford's wife had died by throwing herself overboard. Bradford sort of wasn't really starting off in a very good place when he got to Plymouth. This is similar to Jamestown and all the struggles they faced, especially early on. But they are helped by one Native American in particular upon their arrival, and that is Squanto. Squanto had been taken hostage as a young boy and been taken to Europe. He had spent some time in Spain and England before returning to the New World in 1619, and he found that his entire village had been swept away by diseases that had been brought by the Europeans. It's good. The most important thing that Squanto did is he helped negotiate settlements between these pilgrims, these separatists, and the Native Americans in the Cape Cod region, namely the Wampanoag tribe, Wampanoag, Wampanoag tribe, and their leader Massasoit, who you've probably read about already. This basically ensured colonial security and gave the Wampanoags an alliance against another rival tribe nearby called the Narragansett. So everybody wins, basically, right? And the Native Americans really needed this alliance because they had been damaged by European diseases from people who had previously explored the coast there. And the Pilgrims needed help. They didn't have a lot of food. They were afraid of Native American attacks as well. So everyone comes out pretty good on this one. By 1622, half of the 102 people who had come to Plymouth from Europe had died. A lot of Native Americans had died as well because they didn't have any immunity to European diseases. So that's kind of a recurring thing here in the early part of European exploration of the New World. And to make matters worse, the seeds that the Pilgrims had brought over to the New World, mostly English staples like barley and peas, didn't take in the really rocky New England soil. So they didn't have a ton of food either. But it wasn't all bad. They had fish, they had wildlife, they had corn from the Native Americans, and eventually, later on in the 1620s, reinforcements come from England to sort of repopulate the colony after they had lost some people due to disease and starvation and all of that. Squanto continued to be very crucial in helping solidify relations with the Native Americans. And when survival for a third winter seemed assured, like they weren't all going to starve, they weren't going to have to abandon the colony or anything like that, the Pilgrims invited Massasoit and the Wampanoag tribe to Plymouth for a 3-day feast of Thanksgiving. And that's the first Thanksgiving. And the idea behind it, according to Bradford, was that so all might rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. So that is the not very elementary school-ish story of Plymouth and the first Thanksgiving. No Indian feathers made out of construction paper in this one or anything like that. Make sure to continue your reading, and if you're one of my students, we'll continue later on with talking about the rest of New England, particularly when the Puritans show up in Massachusetts in 1628. Have a good one.